Loving Jesus, you are always with us. And yet today, it's so good to be together as the body of Christ through this time. God, we thank you for the commitment and the love of the Reentry Task Force as they work on behalf of the congregation to make decisions that keep us healthy and safe and that work to keep us connected. God, we pray that you will enrich the committee, but every member of our congregation more and more to see ways that we can be the body of Christ together even through these challenging times. Thank you, God, for the ways that you've blessed us already and draw us together as we listen and learn today in this time. God, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I think what we'll do is turn things over to, let's see, Jean, were you going to,
Yes.
okay, and so
So
if you, before Jean begins, if you would mute yourself so that we can hear what Jean has to say, that would be most wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Jean, you
all right.
have the floor.
Okay. Also, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat button. And feel free to type in comments there, and we'll try to, as you hear questions, try to hold your questions to the end. And if you have a question, just type it in there and we'll get to it, and we'll definitely have a question and answer period at the end.
This way.
Now, someone's not muted. I'm not sure whose that is, but please mute.
No, I think you're blowing across. Oh, because you blow across. I don't think it.
All right. Can everybody see the screen here? It's kind of big there, but we'll get started. And I just want to thank everybody on the committee, and especially Greg Lampe, who did the majority of the writing for the report. And so he'll be doing the main presentation, and I'll be just kind of running the slideshow here. And so our agenda today is, we already had the opening prayer. We'll skip over that, but we'll go into a short introduction here. Basically, these are the members of the task force. You can see that both pastors, Greg, Randy Schultz from the worship committee, he's not able to join us today. Julie's online, Gail's online, and Melanie's also not available today. But the rest of us are here, and we'll be glad to answer questions. So hopefully you can hold your questions to the end. And we did have a listening session back in late June. So you probably saw this. This is a worship survey that was sent out. You can see kind of page 1 here. And we asked 20 questions, and we got 313 responses. And we got a nice written report that summarized results. And then Greg took this kind of statistical report and made actually a verbal report, and that you were sent, and hopefully you had a chance to read through it. And so with that, Greg, I'm gonna let you kind of start in here, and you can take it on.
All right, Gene, thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me, and it's so good that you could all join us this morning. Thank you for that. And for those who did complete the survey, we are so very grateful, profoundly grateful for not only your response to the survey, and that 313 people responded, but also the comments that you provided us. The comments, I don't know about you, but when I've taken surveys and when I've looked at surveys and reviewed surveys, usually comments are sparse. It's so easy to answer the questions, you know, you just check a box. But to take the time to respond verbally, you know, in a written form, really takes a commitment to the process. So thank you so much for your responses and written comments. They are, as you'll see, they were plentiful and extremely helpful to the task force, as well as the worship committee, which we'll talk about later. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage for you. What I'm going to do this morning is try to just cover and not rush this, but be as efficient as I can in covering what I've identified and what the Reentry Task Force has identified as 12 key findings. So as we go through the report, keep that in mind, that I'll be going through 12 of the key findings. We could probably spend more time than 12, but again, in the interest of time and also trying to interpret the survey, I tried to kind of categorize these as 12 key findings. Before I start into the key findings, though, I just want you to see the context for responses. As you'll see, that the responses, it was fairly even. I mean, for the 0 to 30 years of age, 20% of the 389 responses we received, because sometimes people were responding on behalf of a spouse or children or others in the home. So we had 20% 0 to 20, 35% of the responders were ages 31 to 60, and then 45% of our responses were from 61 and above. And if you think about our Sunday worship when we were in person and you look around the congregation, I think you see that this is very representative of the kind of demographics that we see week in and week out when we were together face to face. And also I think in online, we see a very similar demographic. So we feel like we heard from a representative sampling of people, and the responses varied greatly depending on the age groups. And you'll see that reflected in the survey. Okay, Jean, let's go on to the next slide. So this is worship question 1, and basically the question talks about us, Midvale, providing online stream worship and recorded worship. And we wanted to know what options you use. And you can see the range of options there. Jean, if you could just go to the next slide. So in summarizing this, there were several things I just want to highlight. One is that a majority of our respondents take advantage of the live stream service. That's 67%. That's 2/3 of the respondents actually watch it live, and 62% of our respondents, if they don't watch it live, or in addition to watching it live, watch the recorded version of the worship. That's a really strong response. The next most popular identified was that viewing worship from other sources. And in the comments section, the options that were identified, over about 1/3 said they take advantage of the Bethel worship service, the televised one. And so that's the other option. There were other ones, but that was the most predominant one. Okay, Jean, next slide. For the next question, and remember there were 20 questions. The second question talks specifically about the idea of when will you be most comfortable returning to in-person worship in the church building, given the kind of restrictions like wearing masks and physical distance and so on. When would you be comfortable returning to in-person worship? Go ahead, Jean, go to the next. So you can see that there were a number of options identified from effective treatments and vaccines and testing to all the way down to, well, I'll never feel comfortable returning to in-person worship and some other responses. The most preferred option was to return to in-person worship when a vaccine becomes available. Over 2/3 of the respondents identified that. The next most popular was when treatments are readily available, and then when testing and contact tracing are at the highest level. And those were the top 3 responses. And you'll see those responses, by the way, reflected throughout the report, that people will feel most comfortable when these 3 options are available. And then notice that only 7 respondents responded that they would be comfortable going now, which confirms for us, at least on the task force and the worship committee and the staff, that we're on the right track here, that people generally agree that we need not be in person at this time. And over 1/3 of the responses answered that they were satisfied with our current online service. Hey, Jean. In the written comments, and as I said, we received plentiful written comments, which again, we're deeply grateful for. These are some of the notable ones. We can go through 25, but I want to just highlight some for you. This is pretty representative that the online service is working for now, and that means that indicates sort of a hope for future in-person, which I think we are all hopeful for in-person worship at some point. Certainly people would return to worship with restrictions, and would return when large gatherings become an option. And there was only one comment that was negative about our online service, and that was, I do not do online. we could take that a number of ways, but I think in fairness, I wanted to make sure people saw the negative one as well. For worship question number 4, again, we were asking, when would you feel most comfortable in attending an outdoor service? And again, notice the options are pretty much the same as when we asked when you'd be comfortable to return to in-person worship. Okay, Jean, thank you. The most preferred option was when a vaccine becomes available, followed by testing and contact tracing, and then effective treatments. Again, and again, if you move to the next slide, Jean, you'll see the consistency of responses here, that the most preferred option for feeling comfortable for in-person and even on outdoor worship is waiting till there's a vaccine available. That seems to be the prevailing sentiment, at least of the respondents. We'll find out more as we distribute the survey and the results more widely. But for now, it seems that the vaccine is the critical point. And then yeah, go ahead. Okay. And that nearly a third would like to see an outdoor service, which I think is important to note. And then over almost a third of respondents indicated they are satisfied with the online worship. In the comments section, again, we got an abundance of comments, but the striking feature about the comments under this question about outdoor service was that respondents laid out conditions. And I just wanted to share these with you. And I shared this with the reentry task force. We all smiled and thought, interesting. So, you know, we don't want the weather to be too hot. We want people to be socially distanced. We want people wearing masks and so on, no touching. But the last one, an outdoor service should be convened when the weather is cool, dry, and of course, there are no mosquitoes. So I thought that was interesting. And in all seriousness, I think it indicates sort of a reflection of where we are. Yeah, we'd love to be in person. We'd love to get together. Maybe outdoor would be an option, but only with these conditions. And I think they would be difficult to meet, but however, all right, that's where we were. I'm going to be lumping together questions 3, 5, 6, and 7. And that is, so these questions really focused on, one was the print, would you be willing to print out an order of worship ahead of time from home? Would you agree that everyone should be required to wear a mask during services? When we return, do you have a face mask? And would you be willing to physically distance yourself between household family groups and other people in worship? The key findings for question number 4, when in-person worship resumes, respondents will be prepared to return to worship, and they'll follow the guidelines, which was very reassuring. Most respondents indicated they are willing to print their own worship bulletins. Most respondents, 98%, would wear a mask during in-person worship, and most respondents would respect physical distancing guidelines. Again, very affirming and very encouraging, and I think it reflects the caring and compassionate nature of our faith community very well. For question 8, we were looking at physical distancing and the impact that would have on how many people would be allowed into the sanctuary, limiting our seating capacity. And we provided a number of options given that reality, that we wouldn't all necessarily be able to fit into the worship space. And the key findings here reflect, again, what people would prefer. So if one was to register, the most popular response was to register online or by phone to reserve a space in advance of a Sunday worship or Saturday worship. Attending in-person worship in Fellowship Hall was the next most favored response. And the least desirable option, which we took strong note of, was to watch a live remote video feed of worship in a worship room, in a room outside of the worship area in the church building. That was only a third of the respondents indicated that preference. Under the other option, again, we received 48 responses. 22 of the 48, almost half, indicated they would choose to stay home and watch online rather than attending church and watching from another room outside the sanctuary or fellowship hall. One respondent suggested that Midvale hold more services. And this came up again later in the survey, for example, a weekday Vesper service or maybe some other services outside a Sunday morning service. And another respondent suggested that planning worship attendance by risk categories. And this is something that came up again later in the survey. So having families and young children together, grouping people by category. And again, another idea, another out of the box thinking idea for how we might accommodate in-person worship. So for question 9, again, we're following the recommendations of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America and the Wisconsin Council of Churches. We know that we can't necessarily sing together. That's highly risky. So what other options might there be to singing together? And you'll see we provided a number of options there, from piano solo, organ solo, so on, all the way back to other. And again, the most popular response was piano, organ, instrumental music, 79%, which is what we're doing right now, as you know, if you're joining us for live inline online services. Stringed instruments was the next favored, and then piano, organ, and hymns without singing, handbell choir, and then the least desired option for music was a recorded music option. Again, helpful in terms of our planning for in-person worship. In response to that, when we asked for comments, we received 27 comments. 4 of those statements were about including sacred dance. So there was some sense that sacred dance could be part of worship, since it doesn't require us all singing and speaking together. Other notable suggestions included live instrumental music, solos, and so on, but not woodwind music instruments because they would propose too high of a risk, and a use of a cantor to sing the liturgy, and there were also comments about helping the congregation be more active by maybe choosing music that required clapping or even brought from home percussion. So I thought, again, those were notable responses and gives us some other things to think about. For questions 10 and 11, again, we're grouping these because these were short answer questions. One was asking if you've been participating in online Holy Communion, when we do offer twice the second and fourth Sundays of the month, and about distribution of in-person Holy Communion. It's an area of concern. When will you be comfortable receiving Holy Communion in person at in-person worship services? And these were the options that were given, from testing all the way through. I'm not going to feel comfortable returning to in-person worship, and I'm satisfied with online worship. When respondents were asked about participating in online communion, 39% responded yes, and 61% responded no. And so that's, again, very informative for us to know from those respondents, at least, the percentages. They're helpful. When respondents were asked when they would be comfortable returning to in-person Holy Communion, again, notice the answers reflect what I said earlier in those key findings 2 and 3, when a vaccine is available, effective treatments become available, and when testing and contact tracing are at their highest level. So again, a lot of consistency in the responses. It is important to note that 25% of the respondents indicated that they are satisfied with their own worship and Holy Communion. So that's again, very good for us to know. Under the other category, respondents provided, again, a wealth of comments, 23, identifying other options. And here's a sampling. I'm not going to read these to you, but you can see from providing individual communion kits in advance of church or even at church, so that you could do that from your pew, to receiving communion at drive-up worship service, or drive-up before a worship service to get bread and wine, or reserving a time to come to Midvale and receive Holy Communion even during the week. So again, very helpful options. I think this comment really does capture, and I'm going to read this to you because some of it's cut off here by, at least on my screen. So let me just read this. But this was a representative comment. As anxious as I am to receive the sacrament, I just think of a way that it would be safe to do. I just can't think of a way that it would be safe to do so. It would certainly have to involve maintaining the appropriate distance and hopefully gloves, masks, and shields for those distributing, including pastors. Would the communion bread be placed in its own little container? I personally would be more comfortable continuing at home communion. So possibly 1 out of 4 Sundays, I would stay at home and stream the service and have communion that way. So I think this really does reveal very clearly the tension there between receiving the sacrament in person and staying safe. Again, that's reflective of many of the comments that were in that section. Yes, I'm going to keep going here, and I hope I'm not going too fast. I just want to make sure you get the gist of this. So what precautions would you be willing to take returning to in-person worship? And you can see the options available, from self-monitoring my health to standing and sitting in place, 6 feet apart, shaking hands, avoiding crowded hallways, avoiding close physical contact, refraining from speaking parts of worship, refraining from singing together, none of these, and so on. So here is what we found when asked about those precautions. Look at the high percentage of, this is a very impressive number and very consistent numbers here about the willingness to do the things that need to be done in order to keep the congregation safe and healthy and avoid risking people to unnecessary exposure, right, to the coronavirus. Wearing a mask, avoiding shaking hands, and so on. The one that's even the least popular ones, like bringing and using hand sanitizer, refraining from singing and speaking parts, there's still a sense that a large percentage, a high percentage of our respondents are willing to do what's necessary to keep each other safe. And again, very affirming to read that. Noteworthy is that only 2% of the respondents indicated that they would participate in none of those precautions. So very low percentage of the respondents indicated that. Under other response to this question, again, we received a number of comments, 38 in all. But you can see, I think what's interesting here is that people want to find a way to pray together and recite and so on. So whisper or say aloud the Lord's Prayer. They'd rather participate in worship from home if they can't speak in unison or sing together. And as one respondent wrote, I'll stay at home and worship online if all the restrictions have to be taken. I don't see how community is enhanced if they need to go to church, if we need to go to church with all these restrictions. And the other, which again is an underlying theme of the entire survey that comes up in various forms, it just feels sad. And I want to assure you that we all, especially to assure you that the Reentry Task Force and the Worship Committee shares that sentiment, that it is sad that we're in these times, yet we're doing the best we can, as you know, to provide a good faith experience for all and build community that way. For question number 13, as in-person worship resumes and live stream worship continues, which option is most appealing to you? Again, if we resume in-person worship, how should we conduct the online stream for those that need it? And so here are your 3 options. And Jean, if you go to the next slide, we'll look at the results. The results were that Sunday morning in-person worship service should be live streamed. Over half the respondents indicated that Sunday morning services should continue to be live streamed even if we come back to in-person worship. The second option, second most popular one, was to have both options available. And the least preferred option was to hold a separate service for live stream. There's a lot of sentiment around that first option, therefore. For question 14, I will contact the church if I am diagnosed with COVID-19 within 14 days. And the answer, the result was that 99% of the respondents indicated, yes, I would contact the church within 14 days of attending in-person worship if I were to diagnosed. So again, another reflection of the caring, compassionate environment that we are in our faith community. For the next section, we're going to lump together questions 15, 16, and 17. So question 15 was, do you have children age 12 or younger who live with you and typically attend worship? Question 16, if you answered yes, we went through the recommendations that we've been offering: no cry room, no nursery, and so on. Would you bring your own activities to engage your children as needed? And what other questions, suggestions, or concerns do you have about young children in worship during this time? So the results, when asked whether they have children, you have children 12 or under, 20% answered yes, 80% answered no. Those respondents who answered yes to the question in the survey, remember asking about the restrictions, 53 of the 61 who responded, or 87%, answered yes, that they would bring their own activities to engage their children. When asked other questions, what other questions, suggestions, or concerns they might have, again, we received a lot of comments, 97 in all. 47 of the comments answered none. So about half said they had really no comments to make. But then there were the concerns that were expressed are important to underscore here. Concerns about, for example, bathroom use, or active children not being able to maintain the appropriate social distance just because they're active. Young children wearing masks and keeping masks on. Having options for taking children out of the sanctuary who are disruptive, perhaps, or need a diaper change. And then the concern about keeping families separated from people who are more vulnerable or at risk. Again, given that activity level of children, we can understand those concerns. They also made some suggestions in this section about what to do next. So, for example, discouraging the use of acolytes, maybe shortening in-person service for families so that cut down on the activity level, or provide a virtual Sunday school experience for those children that are not in church, encouraging online worship as an option for families, and creating a separate room for families with young children, or even asking youth ministry to share ideas about how to keep young children busy during worship. The one comment that I did want to share with you that I think is important here, and is again very representative, rethinking of worship utilizing media to better reflect, share, and demonstrate worship. Simply repeating the same old is not going to cut it over the extended time in which we will be affected. Creative outside the box thoughts will be the leadership order of the day. Hope abides. So again, a real true reflection of that tension, again, about returning and all those concerns, and continuously rethinking how we're doing things during this period, and not necessarily doing the same old, but really thinking outside the box. And of course, throughout, keeping hope alive, which I think is really, again, an underlying theme in the survey, as we have to keep our hope and our faith moving forward. Question 20 was a critical question. Do you want to share any other comments with church leaders? In this section, we had 115 written comments. That is a lot of comments, and what I did in preparing the report is I broke them into categories. There are actually 4 categories, but I broke them into 3. Expressions of gratitude, questions, suggestions, and the 4th area was concern, which I will highlight to you in a bit. So I'm going to break out these key findings then into those 3 groups, and I'm going to regroup the expressions of gratitude into an additional 3 groups. So under gratitude, I'd like to share with you the expressions of gratitude toward the pastors. That's one category. Towards the staff, that's a second category. And the worship committee and reentry task force, that's the 3rd category, just to kind of ease the number of responses. And I'm not going to share with you 115 of these, but I will try to highlight the ones that I think are truly representative. So you can see here under the church leadership, there's really thanking the church leadership for thoughtful consideration in planning worship, there's a lot of appreciation for the pastors, worship leaders, staff, to continuing virtual worship, and the church leadership for planning and attending to the research and going with the science, and also that online services have been a shining light, which I love that phrase, has been a shining light in some pretty dark places, a way for us to feel connected and comforted. I think that's a really critical part of this, and I think that people recognize the work of our church leaders, our pastors, in making that happen. Okay, Jean. The other category, as I had previewed for you, is staff. And so here you see, again, a couple of expressions of gratitude. I so appreciate all the work and changes that you've walked through together as a staff. It's hard to answer the survey because I seem most comfortable making my decisions as I go. So thank you again. You are all a blessing. And I want the entire team to know just how much I appreciate the thoroughness of your attention to detail as you work towards bringing us back together as a church community. So again, really strong expression of gratitude there. And then finally, expressions of gratitude towards the Reentry Task Force and worship committees. We were pleased to see that people acknowledge that these are difficult decisions. And again, lots of gratitude and thankfulness expressed to listen to the scientists and to continue to connect to the congregation so that we can continue to serve you well. And we are certainly dedicated to the work, and again, appreciate and value and are deeply grateful for all the support we've gotten from the congregation and the pastors as well. So those are the expressions of gratitude toward the pastors. We also had key questions that were raised. Jean, if you could go back to the questions, I'm sorry, it would be, yeah, keep going. One more back, I think. So you can see, and again, I'm not going to read these to you, but there were questions about, for example, the sick room being adequately ventilated, bathroom use, how we're going to schedule congregants into the church if we have to schedule. Why can't we sing? Why can't we recite together, even if we whisper into our masks or behind face shields? Again, a lot of questions around structure of the service and what that might look like. What will the structure of the service look like without reciting prayers together, without singing together, without perhaps even receiving the sacraments? So again, critical questions that we need to, as a reentry task force and worship committee and pastors, consider. Very helpful questions. Okay, Jean, thanks. So now we'll move on to the suggestions, and we again appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking here reflected in these suggestions, and I'm going to go through these again, just highlighting some of the ideas. There's some continued interest in outdoor service expressed throughout this section, and we'll continue to think about outdoor services, and also the idea of individuals making choices about whether or not to return to in-person worship, and the hope that we will allow people to make their own decisions based on their own needs and their own health. So I think that's important. And then of course, some ideas about live stream, meaning needing soloists, flowers, some ways to enhance that feeling that we're really there. Introducing people like who's the organist and so on. Okay, Jean. Next slide, thanks. At the very least, let's work toward parking lot services. And we know that those are happening around the area. Again, acknowledgement of loving the small groups and all the efforts made to build community in a time when we can't necessarily be together in person, face to face. A couple of sharing of ideas about what other churches are doing outdoors, particularly. The last comment on this slide, I'm missing people, but I think more group pods of meeting would be helpful, especially for families over Zoom and so on. So there've been some real good efforts made there, but again, even more efforts in that area. Of course, we did hear from Dr. Dennis Mackey during an adult forum earlier in this season, and a suggestion to continue to consult with him. About not attending services very often, but would like to see some accommodations for Holy Communion. And that again is a theme that rose up all the way through the survey, just how do we do Holy Communion more broadly. Isolate the highest risk at one service. Again, here's that idea reappearing about grouping people by risk level and attending services by risk level. And then please continue to reach out to those individuals and groups struggling the most and let us know what we can do to support them. Again, a lot of care there as well. So much care and compassion and faith in our community, and it's expressed throughout the survey, which I'm thankful for. And all of us on our committee are thankful for that as well as the worship committee. So I put this comment on the top because this really captures what I read with the concerns. I sorely miss being able to attend worship, standing shoulder to shoulder with a body of believers and feeling God's Spirit around me. Certainly captures those feelings that I'm sure many of us are experiencing. In the conclusions of the report, I really came with 4 conclusions, and I'll just highlight these for you. They're on the slides. First, that online worship is not as spiritually fulfilling as in-person worship. All of us wish that we could continue with in-person worship. Online is a good substitute, no question, but it's not the same. That seems to be a prevailing sentiment. Still, with that said, our congregants are really not in any rush to continue to return to in-person worship until a vaccine is available. That is really critical. And under the second conclusion piece, continue with the live stream worship together, and please be considerate of those who don't have internet access, which we really need to continue to think about and explore. Okay, Jean, go on to the next slide. The third conclusion that was drawn from the worship survey is that while there is interest by some in our congregation in holding an outdoor worship service in cars and so on, that it's of interest, but still there are concerns about that, especially the risk of exposing our families with young children and our at-risk population. So again, there's some tension there between even going outdoors where it's considerably safer than indoors. However, even with that said, there's still concerns over the risk factors and having to weigh those. And of course, we're going to have to continue to think about and reach out to our congregation for their guidance as to how many congregants we might assemble in one place at a time. Okay, Jean, one last conclusion, and that is that from what the respondents shared with us, and they do appreciate the work that has been done to date, of course, but now our obligation to you and to the respondents is that we continue to be, to really consider what's been drawn out of this, out of the survey, and continue to develop a plan for in-person worship, which we will do. And of course, the last statement is really critical. We're truly blessed, of course, to have such a strong response to the survey. So Jean?
Yep. Well, thank you, Greg. That was a great summary.
Thank you.
And of course, you still are muted. If you wish to speak, you can click on the chat button, or if you just want to speak up, I think we'll just try to wing it as we go here. And finally, I wanted to say at the end here, if you didn't get your question answered, or if you think of something later, feel free to contact me directly, and see my email address at the bottom. And we'll definitely try to get back to you as soon as we can. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We can see all of each other, and go ahead and start asking questions here. So I do have a few comments here in the chat box.
Jean?
Yes.
I just want to remind you that there are a few of us on the phone, so we're not doing the chat box thing. I'm just
okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just I'm just reminding you of that you may hear a voice that comes out of nowhere, so to speak. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So Nancy Wild wrote a comment in the chat box. Is it possible to enter worship space and provide a time for prayer, reflection, then disinfecting station to clean the space when done during week and sign up online so there are not multiple people using the spaces at the same time? Yeah, these are all good options, but I think there's still a loss of community when you try to separate people. Greg, do you have a further comment on that?
No, I think, whenever we think about bringing people in during the week to the church, even making a reservation to pray in the worship space, which is a wonderful idea and gets us back into church, we have to also consider, what that requires in terms of hygiene and so on for everyone in that building. It's again a delicate balance, but I think it's an idea worth thinking about.
All right, another comment in the chat box from Wendy Brand. It'd be nice to include more remote participation in the service, musicians, readers, etc. I think that's a great comment. I think we're going to explore that and how we can do things more remotely to get more musicians and participation from the congregation into the service. I'm not sure how the current format of using Facebook works with that, but we'll definitely look into that. Anyone else have a question or comment? Well, Nels wrote a comment here. I love music, especially for worship, but it's too tempting to have known songs be used if we are under preventative guidelines.
But this is star 6. Did you want to say anything about liability?
And then, Gene, I added that we should, if we do have songs during worship as we come together when still under preventative guidelines, that we do that with songs we don't know.
Agreed. Yeah. Joe and Jan, did you have a comment?
Oh, yeah. Hi there, Gene. And Craig, you presented it just wonderfully. Thank you so much for what you did. And you, Gene, also. We were wondering about if we're going to have a liability form that the members have to sign, and if you're going to be taking temperatures before people enter, or we're to do that at home first, or any thought of that type of thing.
Well, there are definitely concerns, and I want to thank you for the document that you emailed me on what the Rockford Church is doing. And
Thank you.
And there are a lot of things to consider. As far as taking temperatures, I think there's a lot of liability in just taking temperatures. So I'm feeling.
Ooh, that's a good point.
So I think we all need to kind of self-monitor our own health before we come to church. Are we feeling sick or not? And if there's any questions, stay at home. Is kind of the way I feel about it.
Good point. Yes.
I would like to comment. I would like to comment too on
Nancy?
all the work that. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to. Julie
Nancy.
Walsh just needs to follow up with that question because she had researched the liability forms and things. So.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Blake.
So to follow up with the liability, we spoke with the Congregational Council and with the other lawyers on the council, as well as the research that I had done, and I actually talked with our building insurer as well. And at this time, liability forms really aren't working. They're not enforceable, and it also doesn't really follow our community, because one of the things that we spoke highly of is that we really care for each other, and when we introduce a liability form waiver, it changes how we communicate with each other and the relationship between the church and its members and those present. So at this time, unless either the law changes or there's something else that we don't know about at this time, the Congregational Council and our task force really didn't feel that it followed, that one was necessary, and two, that it really followed with how our church practices.
That's very good. Thank you for that.
Anyone else have a comment?
If I
Question?
could.
Yes, I was just,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
who are you telling to go ahead?
You.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to congratulate all of you for all of the work. I mean, I want to be redundant because I was a responder in the survey and continue to be appreciative of what the pastors, the staff are doing, and appreciative so much of the congregation that we do have and of this task force in the worship committee. Even though I'm not participating in the worship, I'm doing it through Bethel, but I'm there in spirit, so to speak, and am applauding from the sidelines that we are strong and we will continue to be. And I think that the survey that you have just presented of the results would reflect very strongly that it seems we would not need liability papers because it seems like we're a very obedient congregation, so to speak, and very, very much aware of our relationship to one another, and that we need and do care for one another. And liability is really when you're not sure that people are caring for one another. But those are my comments, and I applaud everybody for all you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, if I could, Nancy, thank you for that, and thanks for your expressions of gratitude and appreciation. I share those with you as well. I think the liability piece is really an important point because I think that there's an underlying tension between our mission as a church to be a welcoming church and then putting in place all of these precautions and guidelines. And I think what we tried to do at the Reentry Task Force, Worship Committee pastors, the council as well, we've all been walking together on trying to maintain that welcoming environment of faith that we have and that community that we have, and at the same time providing guidelines and rules that will keep us all safe. And I just want to make that point that we are very much aware of that tension, right, between those two aims, and trying to be respectful about it.
I think Mark and Nan Thompson, you raised your hand for make a comment or question.
Yeah, actually, I have three, but two of them are just commenting on what we've talked about. My company has been working virtually remotely for everyone since mid-March, as the church has been. But there are just a few people that have to go into the office. And if you have to go in for one specific reason, they've got a protocol set up. And we wouldn't have to go this route, but it's a pretty good system. You go in and you answer some questions. You know, have I had any fever? Have I come in contact with anyone? Take your temperature. And if you answer them correctly, it gives you a virtual pass to come into the office for that task that you needed to do that day. We might be able to use something like that as just a reminder to people before we come back on those first Sundays back in, you know, hey guys, you know, please kind of mentally check these things off so you know that, you know, you probably are safe to come in. And that would just be something we could consider doing. My second comment was on music. You know, the Bible school, I don't know how hard it was for them to do those videos with people in different locations, but I thought that was fantastic. I suspect that would be kind of a challenge, but maybe we could do that on occasion, because it really did enhance, you know, you'd have guitars and piano and, you know, whatever together. That was really, really wonderful. Kudos to all the people that helped Brenda and the pastors do that whole thing, because I just thought that was a fantastic job of pulling together Vacation Bible School this year. And third, my personal bias on worship, if without worship and corporate speaking, without singing and corporate speaking, I don't know that I would come. So I'll shut up.
Thank you, Mark.
I wonder if we shouldn't ask the Vacation Bible School people how they did that. Because I've watched some of them and they really were fabulous. Even Joel Olson demonstrated a cooking. You know, there's so many possibilities if you can have several inputs into the videos.
Yeah, I'm thinking that doing it over Zoom versus Facebook offers a lot more options, and we could definitely look into that. One other comment on Mark's comment, we have trained the staff on how to receive visitors, and there is a written protocol on how to do that. And part of that protocol is asking those health screening questions like you mentioned. Plus there's lots of rules on how to use the bathroom and what spaces can be used, etc. And we've also done a similar training for small groups, and we are in the process of training small groups. We recently trained the quilters on how to return, and they're using that to pack their quilts to get them shipped off. So hopefully they're able to benefit. So if there are any other groups who want to come back into the church, we're definitely considering small groups, and hopefully we'll have the space, appropriate space to maintain social distancing. So that's part of the main part of bringing small groups in. Another group that expressed interest in coming back was the handbell choir. So they may be doing something soon, and we'll hopefully see about that. Boy Scouts originally expressed interest, but I haven't heard from them recently, so I'm not sure what's going on with the Boy Scouts. Pastor Blake, have you heard any other groups wanting to come back?
No, at this point, all the information that we've received, none of the other groups want to come back into the building yet at this point. So that we've heard from that initial survey, and no one has reached out specifically to Pam, but you know, as things go on, that may change too.
Jean?
Yes.
Jean? Irma and I have talked a bit about the idea of our coming back into archives, but we don't feel we're quite ready to go and do that and learn what we need to learn. But we talk about it periodically. So we'll keep on that and see where we're at, and then pursue what we need to pursue.
Just contact Pam and set up an appointment, and we'll get you trained if you need to come back.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I could just mention, there's some chat, but while we're looking at those, I could just mention a couple of things. In response to the survey, one of the things we noted was about 40% of the people were participating in online Holy Communion. And so one idea we had was perhaps people would participate more if they had elements prepared for them. And so church supply companies are offering individual prepackaged communion kits. And so we're working on having those available for pickup at the church so that you can use them at home for the online worship coming up. So the week beforehand, there would be an option to pick that up. I don't know if anyone would be interested in that who's on the Zoom now. If we take a little poll, if you raise your hand or something, but that would be one way to make it perhaps easier if it's been difficult to get the elements, or if you feel like it makes it more meaningful if it's coming from the church to your home. So that's one option that we are looking at.
Yep. So there is a way to do this online if you're on the computer. On the bottom, there's what's called reactions. And if you click it, there's a clap or a thumbs up option. And if you just click on that, the thumbs up will come up on your picture, your screen.
So it looks like maybe some of you would be interested in doing that, and some of you are maybe using your own elements, and others maybe are just fine with just watching at that point of the worship. But if you have more thoughts about that, but look for information about that opportunity to pick up elements at church coming up in the next couple of weeks. One other thing we are doing is we will be having some strings hopefully in September and October with the worship service. Laura Sferin and Tyrone and Janet, I think perhaps, or Aaron and Eleanor Mertzenich are working on maybe some ideas to include strings in worship a few times coming up, so we'll have a little more instrumentation. And I think Jean is right, the way that we currently broadcast over Facebook, we're not able to incorporate off-site people. If we used Zoom, there would be more of a possibility to do that, but Zoom, the current subscription we have, has a cap on the number of people that can be on at any one time, which sometimes would be less than the number who are watching the online worship. So, but those are really good things, I think, for us to keep thinking about. And then the idea of an outdoor service. When Pastor Katie had an outdoor Bible study over the summer, and over the 6 weeks, I think unfortunately the maximum participation was 2. So I don't know if that would be the same for an outdoor worship service or not. But there was not a strong interest in an outdoor Bible study, at least over the summer at that point. So.
But it was very hot during that period of time, very hot. So that might have affected it too.
Yeah, the weather does make a difference.
Right.
Lord died on the cross.
Do we want to go to the chats, Jean? I think
Yes,
there are.
so we got a few more up there. The Boy Scouts have been meeting at Westmoreland Park. That's interesting to know. And Nels, I want to thank the task force attention. I feel is how to be welcoming when you need to be pre-register and using different technologies or meetings. Definitely the technology part of it's overwhelming for some people, and I'm not sure how we deal with that. And Georgia Manning, not everyone would have the equipment on their computer to use Zoom. That's maybe an education thing. Is Zoom, they say, as long as you have a regular personal computer, it's pretty much available to anyone who has a computer. But we can review that. And then now, I'd like to invite everyone to the next adult forum. Nels, you want to do this verbally?
Sure. On September 13th, Pastor Ken will be doing an adult forum concerning his reactions and thoughts of what COVID has done with his ministry and how it's impacted Midvale. So we've had some adult forums during the summer, and this is an example of one, but we are trying to kick off on Rally Sunday on the 13th, I guess, a remote rally, so that we will continue to move forward. But I do want to invite everyone to participate in that, and I think Pastor Ken has some insights that he would be willing to share, and you might find interesting.
Thank you, Nels. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating. Again, if you have any further questions, feel free to email me or any of the reentry task force members, and we'll definitely get back to you with an answer the best we can. So,
thank you.
So, Pastor Blake, you want to offer any closing statements?